Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of Dojo Talk. This is the BA Martial Artist coming to you with my amazing friend and colleague, Julie Gatton, to discuss customer experience. But before we get started with the video cast, a little bit about Julie. Julie Ingle Gatton is a customer experience zealot. She loves customer experience because it is the optimization of supply and demand for businesses. Julie began her career as an engineer at General Motors Powertrain Hydromatic. She attributes her best product engineering successes because she optimized for the customer. Julie was part of a small team of engineers to design, build, and start production at the first lean manufacturing plant for General Motors outside NUMMI Partnerships. Julie led an assembly department at Bosch Automotive supplying auto-lock, anti-lock brake modules. She was a member of the start of production assembly leadership team at the Toyota facility in Evansville, Indiana. After obtaining her MBA, Julie has worked in multiple customer experience roles at Capital One and Wachovia Wells Fargo, both at the product and enterprise relationship level. She is known for her abilities to tell stories through data and being a creative problem solver. Julie is a certified customer experience professional, Six Sigma Black Belt professional, Kaizen facilitator, Lean certified, Change Management certified, and Forrester CX Pro 1 and 2. So sit back, relax, and get ready for episode 2 of Dojo Talk, Customer Experience. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of Dojo Talk. I am here with my friend and esteemed colleague, Julie Gatton. As you know, if you've been following my blog this year, we are focused on the different levels of perspective to understand your organization. In January, we kicked off on just talking about the organization, and we had some tools and techniques we learned there. In this perspective, too, we're talking about the customer. It's all about the customer experience, customer journey. And I have an esteemed colleague with me, Julie Gatton, who has a ton of experience when it comes to customer experience. And I couldn't think of anybody better to have in this episode talking about perspective to the customer experience. So welcome, Julie, and thank you for taking time out of your busy evening to join us for this session. So
absolutely, thank you, Paula.
Not a problem at all. So I've had the opportunity and honor to work with you for a couple of years in my day job, and we've worked on business process and different initiatives around customer experience. But what I would like to know is, when did you first get introduced to customer experience?
Well, that's a tricky question. I feel like I've grown up with customer experience. I was first introduced to the value of understanding the customer back when I was an engineer at General Motors, and they were having warranty problems and failures. And what I realized quickly after hearing from the customer was that we had optimized for the engineering and we hadn't optimized for the customer. So all you have to do then is re-engineer things to make it work for the customer, and then everything else works out. From a formal introduction, I would say it was in the early 2000s at Capital One, where they started their journey with customer experience. But I really feel like it's grown up through the Six Sigma and the lean world, and it really is kind of that refocus of, now that the operations are efficient and consistent and meeting those baseline of customer expectations, how do you build on that to remember that there's a relationship that the business should have with the customer, and how to integrate that into the great operations that you have built from Lean and Six Sigma.
Well, that's a great segue into, as we talk about customer experience, what is your definition of customer experience? What does it consist of, since you do have such a broad variety of interactions with different companies with this concept? What is your definition of customer experience?
Customer experience will mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so to me, a customer experience is anytime a customer experiences a company. That can be reading about them in the news, getting an email from them, going into their branch, buying their product if it's a consumer product service. It's anytime there is an interaction between your brand or your company and the customer. To me, that is the customer. All the customer experiences then build up into what they have as the relationship. Obviously, reading about a company in the news doesn't have as much impact on the relationship as them having to call your call center because they had an issue and you resolved their problem for you, right? It's kind of like human relationships, right? Every interaction has a way to mold and build that relationship or break that relationship. But it's all how it all fits together. From a practice of customer experience, the Customer Experience Professional Association would say there's 6 components of it. It's building a culture that is customer centric. It's around understanding your customer and getting that voice of the customer in. It's around adapting your organization to have the governance around the infrastructure of customer experience, the 6 Sigma, the lean, if you will, of customer experience. Having a customer centric strategy, designing around the customer and innovation around the customer, and then measuring and having a return on investment. So those are the 6 components that the CXPA, the Customer Experience Professionals Association, identifies as the components of customer experience.
Okay, wow. Well, clearly you have a passion around this topic. You can tell it when you talk about it, and when I've worked with you, I definitely always felt that passion. And one of the pieces of information I shared in your bio is that it optimizes for you, it optimizes the supply and demand for businesses. And again, you've done this work for multiple companies, but what have you found as one of the biggest challenges in relation to customer experience?
The biggest challenge truly is the optimization point. Right? A business is in business to make money, and customer experience should not be in a replacement of that. So it really is that optimization. So typically, the way balance sheets are built for most companies, there's revenue and there's cost, right? And there's nothing that it is organized by line of business or product line, right? The profitability of your product, the profitability of your business area. It's not set up to really talk about the profitability of a customer segment. And so understanding the dynamics and the measurement of it to optimize your business, right? Because there are things that you can do in customer experience to optimize your revenue. And then there's other things that reduces cost, right? So in some places, customers who are loyal and have a great relationship with you will self-serve more, or they're willing to, right? So they have a lower cost to serve. And so even if the revenue is the same, they're a more profitable customer. The relationship is stronger. So understanding how to optimize across is truly the hardest thing, because our financial systems haven't been set up in the past in businesses to really measure that. So that is the biggest difficulty and struggle most businesses have, because otherwise it's squishy, right? It's a nice to have, or, oh, that's really great, but there really isn't, where is that on my balance sheet? If you're talking to the finance guys, they're like, well, where's that on my balance sheet? And you're like, well, it's in there. It's just, you don't have it. You have never set up a line item for that. So really that is the biggest struggle for most organizations, is how do you monetize the customer experience?
And how have you approached monetizing the customer experience with these companies that you've worked with who don't know how to do that, or who haven't done that? What might be some tips you can give for those companies out there today that might struggle with, how do I get to that monetization? I think I just made up a word too.
Monetization? No, I think it's a real word.
Okay.
We'll say it's a real word for the sake of this. It's a real word because I use it all the time.
Okay.
It really is challenging yourself to understand the profitability of your customer groups. And when we did this first in banking, we realized the value of looking at it. So again, customer relationships, there's going to be points and times where people aren't profitable. And so it's really looking at it from a customer lifetime value perspective, and challenging yourself to set that up. And it doesn't have to be robust. What we first built was not what we called a business case. We said it was an opportunity case, right? So if we can get more customers that segmentation wise we're more loyal, what do more loyal customers look like in this segmentation as a group, as an average, if you will? And can we get more people to look more like them? And what do we need to do to build that relationship so they're willing to look like them, right? So it's not necessarily some people think of it as, and I've heard the word sticky. I hate the word sticky, right? You don't have to build stickiness if the customer's loyal because they want to stay with you, right? So how do you make sure that customers want to stay with you, not that they have to stay with you? In fact, actually, total aside, going off on a tangent, if customers feel like they have to stay with you, they're not going to recommend you to their friends and family, because they don't want them to get stuck like they are. Right. So, stickiness, great. It's retention. You have a customer, but they're not going to tell their friends and family about you, because, they like their friends. Why would they want to get their friends stuck in the same thing? So really, it's really challenging yourself to saying, okay, for the government, for the IRS, for my investors, I'm going to have to look at it by revenue and by cost. But for myself to understand the opportunity that exists for building relationships, I've got to come up with a different way of looking at our customers from a profitability of a customer perspective. One of the things that we did, we realized, was that we had a group of customers who were extremely loyal, and they weren't profitable on average, right? And so they thought it was a great relationship, right? They loved us, but from a business perspective, it wasn't the right business. So the question started becoming not how do you build more customer loyalty, but how do we make sure that we have the right products and services at the right price, so that we're the viable business, right? So it really starts driving different conversations if you can match those things up. And it doesn't have to be perfect, because you're not reporting this to the government, right? This is for your own internal use to build those strategies. So you don't have to be perfect. You can be off. You can be, we built, as we said, we built an opportunity case, and then we said, okay, if we can do this, and then each time we said, okay, here's an individual project that'll move 2% of the customers because we think we're going to build it. What's the business case around that tiny movement, not the big picture strategy piece, right? But you got to have that big picture strategy to even say, what are the projects we need to be working on? The example that I used earlier, it changed what the investments were, because people were investing in better services and building better relationships. And we didn't need to build more relationships until we could figure out the value position for the company. So it really started shifting that conversation and those investments to the right place for both. Again, it's the optimization of the two. You can't have one without the other, because if you have great customer loyalty and non-profitable customers, you don't have a business for very long to have that relationship with. So
Wonderful.
It's just a balance, Paula.
Yes.
Just like life, it's a balance.
Right. It's a balance, which I think we're all experiencing different ways to balance right now in our current state and environment, right? Well,
Exactly.
one thing I've always loved about you is your ability to tell stories. So again, we've worked together, and you can bring a concept to life and a perspective to life, and how we should approach looking at customer journeys or even transformations by telling a story. So what process do you use to tell a story? And in addition to that, why are stories important when you are trying to explain and trying to build the customer experience, sort of like approach and focus in an organization?
So I think the why is going to be easier, so I'll start there.
Okay. That
I'm
works.
going to flip it around on you. Why? Customer relationships are the heart, right? It's not ration. And data is great. Everyone needs data. I love data. I have to have data. But we want to talk to people's hearts. And when you talk to people's hearts, data is not the way to go. Stories are much better, because it sets up a way people in their own minds can start to imagine what's happening to the customer. It really starts building in the heartstrings. I was working on a project this past fall, and we were listening to customer calls, and one came in, and that became our rally cry, and we renamed the customer to Yolanda. And it really became, would this really help Yolanda, right? So it becomes kind of not only the story, but you put a face, and you have this whole history, and you flesh it out, and you can really start rallying around a person or a story much better than you can say, well, 50% of the customers say, well, no, give it a face, right? And imagine, or say, what we're really talking about is your grandmother or your mother. It just makes it much more, again, it's the heartstrings and building the relationships. It's not just about the numbers. Thank you for saying I'm a good storyteller, because
You're great
I don't
at
feel
it.
that way all the times.
No, you are great at it.
I'm a Southerner. I don't. How do I? How did I learn how to tell stories? That's all I knew growing up. As you know, Paul, a lot of times family history is handed down, especially when you have relatives who were not educated in schools. They're handed down through stories. And so, how did I learn how to tell stories? On my grandparents' knees. Um, Stories really just are giving a beginning and end and trying to set people up to so that they can envision it. So it's not no longer kind of your truth, it's everyone's truth. There's a lot of books around formal storytelling and everything that I read a lot because I like it. But I don't know that I would say I'm a great storyteller, but thank you.
Well, so you have impressed me enough that I do feel that you are a great storyteller, and it's
Well,
through your
thank you.
stories that we are able to get work done. So it's an important concept, definitely out there. There's something about a story. People remember stories. So when you tell the
They do.
story, it's memorable. So I'm quite sure as you've worked on the customer experience in these different companies, you probably have had some resistance to why should we even focus on the customer? Why is this important?
Never.
All right. I'm trying to build new technology solutions and focusing on things like that. So what have you done to combat that resistance to get people to buy into the importance of customer and to focus on the customer?
Typically, the reason why everyone will sit there and do their head nod. Yes, customer experience is important. We want to have satisfied customers. We want to have good relationships with customers, you know. And so a lot of times the resistance is because one, they don't see the monetary value of it, which we've already discussed. And the other one is it's personal. There's some sort of personal change to it. Either you are implying that whatever they installed 20 years ago is no longer what should be installed. I ran into that a couple years ago, and the leader kept saying, I don't understand why we need a new measurement system. We put this in 10 years ago, and it was the best thing ever. And you know, I agreed. 10 years ago, it was the best thing ever. So I said, can I ask you a personal question? The person said, sure. I said, do you have the same cell phone you had 10 years ago? He's
Mm,
like, no, why would I have the same cell phone that I had 10 years ago?
there
I
it
said,
is.
okay. I said, okay, I was just asking the question. So let's talk about this new measurement system. And he was like, oh, you got me. Right. And so a lot of times it's just helping people understand, like, we're not saying that what's they hear now is broken. It's just, it was the best we knew then. And now we know something better. So we need to do something different. And a lot of times that kind of catches people off guard when you say it that way. So I usually try to say that. The other thing that I've run into is it impacts how someone measures their own personal success in business.
Mm,
So with the change, you have to remember that the other component of that is you're going to potentially be measuring success differently, and so that means something for some people. And so how do you help them understand how they're going to be measured for success? Or I've had a case where I'm going to simplify this. Leader A could give up $50, and leader B could make $100 if they did. But that meant leader A now wasn't making $50. Um, and if that's built into his compensation or his expectations for performance, it's great to say, yes, I want to do the right thing for the customer. But then you're like, but if I do, I'm actually not going to meet my own performance goals.
mhm,
Right. So how do we then tweak the performance goals so that you're getting credit for that $50, if you will,
mhm.
because you enabled the company to make an extra $50. So it's not about you. And so you really have to mind for understanding and changing everything around it to make whatever the changes work. Sometimes that's not the case, but really being mindful that the resistance is there because of a reason, and getting to that reason is really what's going to help you enable things. And I just gave two very different examples. So it's not one size fits all. It's really understanding why there's the resistance to the change.
Yep, understanding that root cause of the resistance and then figuring out how do you get them to buy in. 100%
Yeah.
agree. And I think we all experience that at work in some in some way in the work that we do. So
Oh,
what do,
absolutely.
oh,
It's easy to say be a team player.
right, right. It's easy to say to collaborate too, right? We need to collaborate and work together towards a common goal that may not seem that common to everybody. Very, very
Exactly.
true. So what tools have you used to identify and document the customer experience? One of the things I'm talking about in my blog that's going to be that I've talked about is around the customer journey map. So that's one tool that is really known for the customer experience, but I just didn't know if you had anything additional that you use to document that.
Customer journey maps are awesome. And the thing that I like about customer journey maps is that they don't have to be very prescriptive at times, and they can be at different levels. And so some of them can be very process oriented, right? And almost like the way I learned it is more like you're writing a play, right? And so the interaction is like a play, and you have a scene, and you have props, and you have the characters, including the customer. And so you can kind of write the script out and play out the scene, right? And design the experience. And then you can have the processes to that supply the props and do all the underlying transactions. It can also be done at almost like a corporate level. I've seen one for an insurance company that is it was health insurance. And so what they did was they said a customer's life is like a person on a boat, and they're going down a river, and everyone goes down the river, and there's rocks in the rivers, and there's sometimes there's deep waters and treacherous waters, and sometimes you get hung up in the foliage in the banks, right? Everyone goes down the river, but everyone has a very different experience on the river based on their own self. And so if you hit the rock of cancer, right, what's the experience of that, right? And so they started telling their customer experience vision at a corporate level with a map that truly didn't really look much like a map. To me, at first, it looked like a picture, right? And so when they started telling it, and so you can really start understanding what they're trying to design at that high level, and then it gets down to the granular of, then this happens, and then you pick up the, tool that in your desk and pull it out so that you can provide this information to the customer, right? You can be very prescriptive, but it can also set that story and that strategy. And I think that's where a lot of companies really think of customer journey maps at that lower level and that more tactical level versus that more strategic and vision level. So same tool, just very different applications. The other dynamic of it too is really understanding kind of that customer blueprint, the storytelling, the building of the acts. And a lot of it too is traditional type tools and analytics, just twisted from a finance business perspective to the customer, and building those tools out for what makes sense for your company. And really taking it and understanding it from a customer perspective. Mm-hmm. There's a wonderful story about H&R Block that I love around customer journey maps. They started mapping the customer journey, and they started their journey with the customer walking into the H&R Block with their little shoebox with their receipts for the year, so they could start the conversation for taxes. Right. What they realized was they were not taking a customer-centric view. The customer journey of doing your taxes starts when you start the new shoebox for the year to put your receipts in. So that's when H&R Block really started building out a lot of their online tools around planning for taxes. If you use their software, the last thing that they do is they start talking to you about planning for the next year. Because when you're finishing up one year's taxes, right, you're mentally kind of moving on, right? And so they're trying to encourage that conversation before you even start next year's taxes, so that next year even your shoebox is even more organized than it was this year, right? To make it easier for you and make it easier for them. So it's understanding that experience and using your tools to understand the customer experience, not the company's experience, because they may be different. Exactly. So that's the biggest tools. There's a lot of different tools that are available. Again, a lot of them are just kind of tilted on their traditional tools that you would see in Six Sigma, DMAIC, lean principles. It's just tilted to do that customer view.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you for that. And you mentioned something there that I also uh, mentioned in my blog around the balance between the customer experience and the internal team member experience as well. Because sometimes there's not that balance there, and we have this great idea for customer experience, but the processes internally for the team member are so cumbersome and horrid that they're putting a risk into even getting the service to the customer the way we would like to get it to the customer. So there has to be a balance there. We can't forget about our internal to make this customer experience great, especially if we don't have the infrastructure to do it at that point in time, right?
Especially if you don't have the infrastructure to do it. And it's difficult with the best of intentions. If you want to give great service and you're sitting there and you've got like one small screen and you've got to have 15 different programs up to serve the customer, and so you're trying to have a conversation with them and you're trying to monitor all this, and you're only on a 13-inch screen, and you got to toggle back and forth and copy and paste, and so you got to spend all this mental energy, right, to kind of do everything behind the scenes, and you're still trying to have a conversation and be, conversational and warm and
Right.
pleasant. It's impossible. Like, and that's absolutely, it's difficult to have great customer experience without engaged team members, because engaged team members will figure out how to get it done, even if the tools may be a little lacking, or it's not it's not something in the playbook, but people are creative. We're
Yes.
finding that out right now, right? In the time of necessity, people figure stuff out. So giving people having them engaged and empowered to do the right thing for the customer at the right time, obviously with guardrails, is the only way to really ensure that you're going to have great customer experiences.
Agreed. Agreed. So if someone wanted to get more education on customer experience or just have some resources, what would you recommend?
There's a ton of books around customer experience. My favorite authors are Joe Pine and Clayton Christensen, who actually is business, not necessarily customer experience. But they really have that customer view. These are both kind of the founders of customer experience. So their books are 20 and 25 years old. So fair warning, they're 20 or 25-year-old books. The foundations of them are still great. The CXPA, the Customer Experience Professional Association, has a website, cxpa.org. There's a whole bunch of tools and resources on there. I think there's even a top book list that you can kind of see what the latest books are and everything. Great kind of place to look for resources. Again, everything's kind of in those 6 segments. So depending on what part of customer experience you're interested in, you could read about customer measurement or the strategy pieces of it, or whatever's of interest of customer experience to you.
Perfect, perfect. Great information. Great information. So, Julie, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us today. I
Absolutely.
highly respect you, love working with you. You gave us some great information tonight. For those who are listening, I hope you found this episode to be very informative, as much as I have. I always learn something from Julie. I look forward to moving into perspective 3, which is about business process, my wheelhouse, in May. So that's gonna be some great couple of months around that, and I have a special speaker coming on for that one in June as well. But Julie, I don't know if people wanted to connect with you, can they connect with you on LinkedIn? How do you normally
Absolutely.
connect and network?
LinkedIn is the best way. Julie Ingle Gatton. I believe there's only one of me.
For right now.
Fair warning, my LinkedIn profile, Paul is giving me a hard time. I have long hair, so if you're watching this and you're like, that doesn't look like her, it's me, it's just longer hair.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you again for joining me tonight and talking about customer experience, a topic that you have definitely helped me to get more knowledgeable on and increase my expertise in just by working with you. And for everyone else out there, it's been great talking with you and providing this information. This is the BA Martial Artist coming at you, and until next time, I'm signing off. Have a great day, everyone.